I would not have an iPhone if it hadn't been for my job that I had before I became here. I would not have an iPhone if it wasn't for this job. It can be conveniently used. And you say, well, there's some good things in it there, aren't there? Yes, they are. And there's some good things in the slot bucket too, but I don't do it. Yeah. And I didn't have to face what they face. That's right. It was bad enough as it was. I think about the reality of when I grew up, and I was glad I was raised in this part of the country. That's right. And wasn't raised in other places. So young people, this preacher and this church this morning is not looking down on you. We're so thankful that you're here. And Timothy was young, like and as most young people, he was vulnerable to where all the young people's perfect, makes no mistakes. And I'll say now, start with adults. You're not going to find it. That's right. And you're not going to find one where the adults are mistake-free and the perfect church. Do you know what happens when you change churches? If you change for the wrong reason and you're running from a problem, say they hurt my feelings or I got my feelings hurt intentionally or unintentionally, and a lot of times it's unintentionally, and I'm going to go down there at that church. When you get down there, the only thing that's going to change is the faces of the people. That's right. That's right. They have the same problems. Every church has the same issues no matter where you go. So you need to be careful before you start making those moves. And we tend to forget those mistakes we made and get critical a lot of times of young folk. And it's coming up. It makes theirs. And guess what? Folks of us that's not considered young folk anymore, we still make our mistakes. That's right. Every day. And in order to address this, Paul calls Timothy to live a life so he can live so godly that nobody can look down on him. You think that's possible? I think the strive to do so is possible. Do I think look down on you? No, because human beings, there's the meaning of a pattern. A pattern is something you can go by to make something else. And to live as a pattern so that other young people could follow you is a difficult task. And it's not saying that because you live like a pattern, everybody's going to assemble those catalogs there. Each lady had a pages that went from this high down to about here, and they'd pull those pages out in order and put them in a box and slide it down. The next lady pull the pages out in a box, slide it down. When it got to the end, all the pages for that catalog was there. It went over to another place and they were stapling. Every one of those catalogs had staples in them. Went to another place and they got taped. And they stacked them on a pallet. And they stack up a whole pallet of those catalogs and they'd send them down to Doraville, Georgia to where the headquarters was, and they'd ship them out from down there. So I was the lift truck driver. Loaded them on tractor trailers. I know about McCall Pattern Company. You ladies know about what that is. To make clothes, you had to have a pattern. You cut it out based on the pattern. We should live a life that can be cut out and people could pattern their life after us as Christians. And young people, he's encouraging Timothy to be that way. It also carries a meaning of an impression, the mark of a hard blow, an imprint that you could take and stamp something into something. And make a design in leather or metal. You can stamp it out and it's there. It's imprinted. It's there for good. And it's imprinted and it never goes away. When you're training a horse, and I'm going to move as fast as I can. I got started late because of our little presentation. I knew we would. But just bear with me. When you have a little baby foal colt born, they go through a process within the first 24 hours. It's called imprinting that colt, that little baby foal, that little baby horse. And you go in there and you stick your fingers in their little mouth and get on used to the sensation of having a vent in their mouth. You play with their ears so they're not sensitive when somebody tries to handle their ears or head. You pet their face and around their head. And you'll put your hands around their little nose and feel all around their ears so they can feel that sensation. And you rub them all over their body so they're sensitized to feeling what it feels like for somebody to be petting on them and handling them. You take their little legs and you bend them up and you'll pick on their little hooves, all 4 little hooves, and you bring that around and you do everything you possibly can to make that little colt feel what he's going to be facing in the future. And that gets imprinted on that little colt's mind. So when he starts being trained, he's not as hard to handle. And matter of fact, you do that regularly, and by the time it's time to start doing everything there is to be done to him, he's fine. He's fine. And I've been able to do that because I was born a horse lover, and I've been able to do that a couple of 3 times. And when you do that and do it right, they don't even buck when you start riding. Now, something might get wrong with them later on, like mine did, with some sore teeth in his mouth. And when he won't go, and you make him go anyway, I'll bring him on down here. He'll be okay. I did. He wasn't okay. He had sore teeth. And I was sitting on him as relaxed as I could sit, and he went, there I go sailing up in the air. Hal seen witnessed the whole thing. I landed on my head, back of my head, my shoulder, and my back. And the leg on the outside slapped the ground so hard, it was black from top to bottom. Bruised it so bad. And it jarred that kidney stone I had in my kidney loose, and I didn't know I had it until a week later. And I felt the effects of that. But that's the only time he's ever done that. Just that one time. The one you kids are riding around here at Vacation Bible School, it was him. And he ain't done it since. His teeth was sore, Joe. So, what I'm saying is, get in church, get involved, get with it, and look what God can do with you is going to be amazing. Some of the greatest preachers and teachers and Sunday school teachers and missionaries and piano players and everybody else started when they was young. Y'all got a great opportunity to do something for God. That's what I'm trying to encourage you to do. So, being an example with Timothy being considered young, it would be easy for the older Christians to look down on him. I remember when I was a young preacher, they didn't take me real serious. People didn't when you went and preached. They wouldn't take you real serious. You was doing the best you could. You didn't know a whole lot. You had to get in front of people and you're scared to death anyway, and you didn't know how to do a lot. And people would look down. They'd come up to you and try to be kind and gentle after church, and when you knew they were looking down at you anyway, and to tell you how much they enjoyed the message. And you know they didn't. You could just tell they was trying to be nice, and I appreciated that. But they do. They just have a young preacher don't have much of effect when he's young. You know what it sounds like? When a young preacher's preaching, even myself, when I was first starting out, it sounded like a young rooster trying to crow for the first time. It just didn't have much of an effect. Couldn't really get the job done. And if I preached 5 or 10 minutes, I said, man, I preached 10 minutes. I thought that was a big deal. Now y'all wished I would preach 10 minutes. Titus chapter 2 says this, in all things showing thyself a pattern of good works and doctrine, showing uncorruptness, gravity, and sincerity. And young people, he tells us and asks you to be an example of the believers in words. That's talking about your speech. In all that you say, private and publicly. Not just in bad words, but in bad statements. Negative statements against other folk. He said in Titus 2, in verse 8, sound speech that cannot be condemned. In James 3:10, James says, out of the same mouth proceedeth blessings and cursings. He said, my brethren, these things ought not to be. In other words, cussing and blessings out of the same mouth don't work. The cursing negates the blessing. So if there's cursing coming out and then you give blessings, people's not going to pay a lot of attention to it. Right. And can I say this? I've never in my life heard as many girls and women cussing as I hear today. Yep. Right. Words that in my day growing up, if words that people would say, and when somebody would say it, you'd gasp because somebody was mad enough to say that word meant somebody was about to die. You just didn't say that word. Now it's just every other word. They let it out of their mouths. And I don't recommend this, and I wouldn't do this, but I heard a guy that was involved with young people. And the young people he was with, these boys, I'm just going to tell you what they were saying. They were saying that F word. And they was listening to it roll. And he'd encourage them not to do it. And he explained to them why, and he'd encourage them not to do it. Finally, one day he said, I'm going to fix them. So he set him to doing it, just like they was. And they just stopped and shut up and stared at him. And he said, now boys, and I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do it. I couldn't make it vomit it out. He said, that's what you sound like. Every day, all day long. They couldn't believe it. Basically, I would have recorded it on my phone and played it back to them. Would have been a better deal. Get that word to come out. But girls say it, boys say it, mama say it, daddy say it. God help us, is all I got to say about that. And take God's name in vain. Oh my, and then say God. That's taking God's name in vain. It's just like saying God and then saying and using damn as his last name. That's God's name in vain. There's a preacher who goes around witnessing to people all the time, and he asks people on where he's witnessing and testifying and trying to get them to share the gospel with them. Would you use your mama's name in vain like that? No. Why are you using your Creator's name like that? Right. He said, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. That's one of the 10 Commandments. He ain't changed his mind about that. Is that going to get you to heaven? No. But it's give you the way to live. He said, I won't hold you guiltless. You're not going to be guiltless for taking my name in vain. That's very, very important. People don't realize it. Out of the same mouth. Be right with what you say. And then he said in conversation, number 2 is conversation. That means your conduct, the way you live your life, the way you behave in your life. This is your walk through life, the way you behave, the way people knows you by your behavior. That's what conversation means in this verse of Scripture. And 1 Thessalonians 2:10, he said, Christian young people, he said, ye are witnesses. And God also, how holy, justly, and unblameably we behaved ourselves among you that believe. We're not just supposed to do that among the people that believe. We're supposed to do it among everybody. And in 2 Thessalonians 3:7 says, for yourselves know how you ought to follow us. For we behaved ourselves. We behaved not ourselves disorderly among you. Not only in our speech, in our words we use, the things we say, in our conduct, in the way we behave, the way we live before others, but also in brother's love and in Christian love. Matthew 22:36. Somebody came to Jesus. They said, Master, which is the great commandment in the law? And Jesus answered them and said, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. That's one of the 10 Commandments. We can't keep it either. Right. We can't keep that. We fail. We fail. That's why we couldn't get saved without Jesus dying on the cross. We're to pay attention and love one another that way. What if everybody loved each other that way? What kind of problems do you think would evaporate off the face of the earth? If we as Christians would treat each other that way, how do you think the churches would come out? It would be different, wouldn't it? And we pretty much get to do that here, and I'm so thankful for the love that flows between our members here at the church. Doesn't mean we agree about everything each other says. No. It means we love each other enough, we're not going to let it bother us enough to cause a big stink over it. That's what that means. That's how you do that. You treat each other like you want Jesus to treat you, and you will come out good. Is that right? Is that right or not? He said, and the second commandment's like unto it. Here we go. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Who's your neighbor? Everybody. Everybody. Love them like you love yourself. In John 15:12, Jesus said, this is my commandment, that ye love one another as I have loved you. That's just what I got pointing to when I said that. Want people to treat you like you want Jesus to treat you. Or you want to treat other people like you want Jesus to treat you. And you do that, you're doing what those verses say. Not only in the speech and the word and the conduct, the brotherly love, but also in the attitude. Oh, you've heard people say, oh, you got a tude. That means you got a bad attitude. You got a bad attitude. You're not cooking with grease. You got a bad attitude. It's talking about in their spirit. Be an example in your spirit, which is talking about your attitude, the matter of thinking and feeling, behaving that reflects the disposition that you have. Your mood. A lot of Christians have a BA degree. That's not talking about bachelor's. That's a bad attitude degree. Philippians 2:14 says, do all things without murmurings and disputings. You say, what does that mean about griping and complaining and arguing? Proverbs 17:22 says, a merry heart doeth good like a medicine. That's what kind of spirit we should have about us. In reference to our spirit, it's talking about our temperament. We've heard it say, that person has a real gentle spirit. They've got a real kind spirit about them. They have a real sweet spirit about them. Then you have them say, well, they got a real grumpy spirit about them. Or he's mean-spirited, or they're mean-spirited, or they have a bitter spirit. They have a critical spirit. They're talking about their temperament, the way they are in their beside their person. The spirit is not coming out like it should. It's coming out in a bad way. I wonder what folks says about our spirit, about us. People who develop a critical spirit is usually a bitter person. And then they become critical not only of some things, but they become critical and bitter about everything. And they may listen to a sermon for the sole purpose of finding something in that sermon to criticize. Got to find something to say bad about that message. Then he says he wants you to be an example in faith, in the sense of faithfulness to God, faithful in living for God. In Colossians 3:23, and whatsoever, because I didn't want to do anything that would cause them to look negatively toward me. I might change my attitude a little bit about some things that I normally would have thought and done differently, but I didn't want to cause them to look different at me. But I didn't do what I did for the Lord so that men could see. I tried not to do that. 2 Corinthians 5:15 says that he died for all, Christ, that they which live should not henceforth live unto themselves, them and rose again. Them and rose again. Like 1 Thessalonians 4:7, God hath not called us unto uncleanness, but unto holiness. 2 Timothy 2:22, flee also righteousness, faith, charity, peace,